This is Easter Sunday, and we are telling the old story of the empty tomb when the women and the disciples showed up and were looking for Jesus' body and instead found the power of the resurrected Christ. And I want to give us a little bit of context for this in the Gospel of Mark. That's where we're going to start, chapter 16. The Sabbath is over. So the Sabbath for Jewish people begins on Friday night, goes to Saturday night, and Jesus was killed on Good Friday, died on the cross for our sins, and his body was taken and laid, if you read in chapter 15 in Mark, was taken and laid in a stone tomb that no one else had ever been laid in before. The Sabbath comes, a day of rest, where Jewish people cannot do any kind of labor. And so when the Sabbath is over, early in the morning, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, they bring spices so that they can go and anoint Jesus' body. And it's early, but it's just after sunrise. See that in verse 2? So the sun is kind of creeping up over the horizon, and they're going into this garden area where they're going to go and anoint his body. And spices, that was something that they did in ancient Israel. When someone died, they would take spices and anoint the body. They did that for King David in 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 14. When he dies, they take spices and anoint him. They're going to do that for Jesus as well. And they're asking themselves on the way to the tomb, who's going to roll that stone away? And you can kind of see a picture of, a modern version someone has created of some stone tombs and a rock that you could roll in front of it. We read that Joseph of Arimathea rolled this stone in front of that, but this is not going to be women's work. They don't have the tools, they don't have the levers and such, and they maybe don't have the brawn to get that stone out of the way. Who's going to get it out of the way? Maybe they're imagining they can find someone around, a gardener or such, who will help them get that stone away so that they can slip inside. But they find a surprise. Verse 4, the stone is already out of the way. Gospel of Matthew tells us how that happens. There's an angel involved, and you can check that out. But verse 5, they find another surprise. As they enter the tomb, they see a young man, an angel, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they are alarmed. They are afraid, which is the usual response when people come face to face with divine power, with angels or God. And the angel says, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, or Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified." And follow very closely what he says after this. He has risen. He has risen. He is not here. This is the hinge verse in the entire scriptures. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. There it is. Look, he's not there anymore. Go tell the disciples and Peter. And the women, they do not know what to do, right? Because this has totally blown all their expectations, even though Jesus has talked about his death and his suffering and his resurrection before, but the women do not know what is going on. They look in and they see an empty tomb, and they see an angel, and they see, "See, he is not here. He is risen. Go and tell the disciples." But what are they to tell them? Well, they think back, we know from some of the other gospel accounts, and the disciples get their act together, and they remember the words of Jesus, such as what Jesus said in John chapter 11, 25 and 26, where Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even though they die, will live. And anyone who lives and believes in me, even though they die, will continue to live. Do you believe this?" Right? Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." And he gave meaning, substance to what they were going to experience when they encountered the empty tomb. And so here we have this bare fact of the reality that Jesus is not present, but it's not just something from history. It's not just weird old thing. Like, do you remember how we went to the tomb and it was empty? Or do you remember that? It's not this thing that's stuck in history. It is a powerful reality that is blown out into the world, that Jesus is not dead any longer. He is risen. He has just torn the grisly, dark bars off of death and broke free. Death cannot hold him any longer. He is risen. And I think that the meaning of this is that because he lives, we can live. If we place our trust in Jesus, he will lead us to the good and abundant life. And what kind of a life is that going to be? When Jesus was talking to Mary in John 11, right? This good and abundant life, this real life, this resurrection and life. When he's talking to Mary in John 11, before the fact of his death and resurrection, he said, "Do you believe what I'm telling you? I can raise your brother Lazarus. I can just say, Lazarus, come out, and the power of God will give him life, and he'll come right out of that tomb. Do you believe what I'm telling you?" And Mary in John 11 responded in an interesting way. She said, "Yeah, I know that on the last day that he's going to be raised. I know that when all of humanity comes and stands before the judgment seat of God, that he'll be there too." And that was part of the Jewish faith of the day. If you read, say, the prophet Daniel, he talks about how some who dwell in the dust will be raised to stand before God. Or you look at Ezekiel and the dry bones. There was this idea that the dead will be raised, the righteous to eternal life. And so Mary says, "Yeah, I get that." But Jesus is talking about something more than just that. He is saying, look, I'm the resurrection and the life. I am right now the resurrection and the life in the present tense. There is a present tense reality to the hope that he's talking about, as well as a future tense reality. And both are important, and we see both coming to terms here in this moment when Jesus is raised from the dead in Mark 16, because we see the kind of existence that Jesus has. I mean, they look into the tomb, and the body is gone. Right? This isn't just a ghostly spiritual resurrection. Jesus is not there. His body is gone, but neither is this some kind of like a shambling zombie sort of resurrection. I mean, what is up with zombies in our culture? I don't know, but they're just like everywhere, right? But it's not a zombie resurrection. Jesus is resurrected in true, authentic, eternal, powerful life. And they don't see that all quite yet. They just see the fact of the empty tomb. But we see what kind of a life Jesus is inviting all of his people into, because he's the first fruits from the dead, and that means there's going to be more fruits, all of us who believe in him. It's a present tense reality. It's also a future reality. And when I think about the future reality that we're trusting Jesus to lead us into, I mean, this is where our hope is for the future. I mean, this is what lets us live beyond death, because all of us will experience death. All of us will lose someone that we have loved dearly. Have you ever experienced losing someone that you love dearly? I mean, I have. Not long ago, we took a trip to Illinois to spend some time with my grandparents, knowing that my grandfather had very little time left. And in our last conversation with him, I said, "Opa, I don't know if we're going to get to see you again." And he said, "Maybe not, but if not here, then on the other side." And you know what? That is our hope. On the other side. That there is an eternity of real, authentic life with God. That the good life, the resurrection life, the abundant life that Jesus promised, that life continues on into eternity, and that anyone who lives and believes in him will share in that life and be a part of the people of God and see all of those who have committed their lives into his hands. We'll see them again. I mean, it's about seeing Jesus. That's what it's about. But we will see those whom we have loved, who have gone on ahead of us. We will see them again. And that's part of the hope. That's what Mary knew about in John 11. She's like, "Yeah, I know that's going to come down the road." That's the eternal hope. This is a little bit of the see the emptiness of the tomb. Go and tell what's going on. And this eternal hope, this is my bread and butter as a pastor. I mean, I have this wonderful privilege of walking with people who believe this, right? Of walking with a church that stakes its life and its faith on the reality of what Jesus taught and lived and who he is and what he showed us on the cross and in his resurrection. We stake our hope on this fact that because he was raised, we will be raised. And so death does not have the last word. Death does not win. The cross is not the end of the story for Jesus, but in fact, we see the empty tomb, and that is hope for all of us, for our eternity and our future. That's my bread and butter. I mean, I get to walk with people in those sacred places where they are holding on to that reality. And I feel so privileged about that. It's a hope for eternity, but it's also a hope for the present tense, right? That we can live the good and abundant life now with Jesus. And listen, Jesus said himself, do you remember this? Back in John 10:10, Jesus said, I have come so that you may have life. There it is again, right? He's the resurrection and the life. I have come so that you may have life and so that you may have it abundantly. It's a present tense kind of a hope. It's something that we live right now. It's not just, hey, when we die, we get to go to heaven. It's now. Heaven starts now. We live it now. Present tense, have life and have it abundantly. And listen, I am convinced that the question of how we are to live is one of the most important questions that is out there for us as human beings, right? It's a uniquely human question. Just think about this. How are we supposed to live? What is the good life? And animals don't have this issue. Protozoa do not have to think about this. They just wriggle around in their microscopic worlds. And dogs do not have to think about what the good and abundant life is. They are just dogs. Naturally, they're dogged. They sniff and lick and dig, and no one has to tell them what to do. Chickens know how to be chickens without anybody telling them. They do. But we have to think about how we live the truly human life. How do we really live? We are alive, so now what? I mean, we've got to learn to live well, and we've just like we've got to learn to talk and walk and program computers, we have to ask ourselves, what is the point? I'm alive, what is the point? And honestly, most people never figure this out. I think a lot of people don't even know that there is a question to be asked out there. And what a tragedy to reach the end of your life and to say, I'm not sure why I'm here. But you know what? You exist. You were born. God made and intended you. God wanted you to be born and to be alive and to live truly and deeply. And the very fact that you are here on this planet means that God has breathed his life and purpose into you. And Jesus is showing you the way to that good and abundant life. We're alive, now what? How are we to live? A lot of people don't know there's a question, but it's actually a very old question that a lot of people have asked. Seneca, the ancient Roman philosopher, put it this way. He said, the part of life that we really live is small, for all the rest of existence is not life, but merely time. Have you ever experienced that? Just passing time, just getting through. I'm not really living. Nobel laureate and co-inventor of the laser, Charles Hard Towns, said this, I believe there is no long-range question more important than the purpose and meaning of our lives and our universe. So how do we learn how to live? Well, Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He shows that he has that life to give when he is raised from the dead. That abundant life pours out in everyone who follows him. So how do we know how to live? Well, I'm convinced that Jesus shows us the way. And I'm convinced that Jesus is the way. And you know, I know that can kind of sound embarrassingly simple to say that Jesus is going to show us how to live the resurrection life because he is so far removed from our current reality, right? I mean, it would be really easy to think like, look, that guy, he lived a long time ago. He just doesn't know anything about life today. I mean, he wore sandals, for God's sake. He dressed in robes and rode on a donkey. I mean, can Jesus really know what's going on in our lives and really be someone who can teach me how to live? It can sound too simple, right? And I know, too, that there are always other alternatives out there, other ways to think about what is the good and abundant life. I mean, there are so many different options, just like there was in antiquity. There's always family and science and sex and shoes and career advancement or anything that we might think is worthy to center our lives around. There are so many glittering little gods who are vying for our attention as to the good way of life. But Jesus is showing us a different way, a better way, something deeper, there's got to be something beyond that. And it's hope for the future for sure, but it's also a life that is lived in Him with meaning and purpose right now. And there's some indices that are out there. The Organization for Economic and Development and Cooperation, or Cooperation and Development, which was an organization that was founded to administer the Marshall Plan. Remember the Marshall Plan, World War II, from your history books or from your lived reality, that rebuild Europe after World War II. The OECD, they've got 11 indicators, and they pull people from all around the world, and they say, hey, what does it look like to live the good life? And it's got the types of things that we know we need to be truly alive, the basics, right? Having work, having shelter, having food, those sorts of things. But one of them that they ask about is life satisfaction. And of their 11 indicators, life satisfaction consistently ranks number one or near the top when they poll people all around the world. And part of what that tells me is that we as human beings have this inherent sense that we can have it all. We can have the good job and the wonderful family and the peaceful neighborhood, but yet not have what matters most. That there is this spiritual component that lies inside of all of us, and we can either have it or not, that we know there must be something more. And I think that Jesus is pointing us towards that. He's not neglecting all those other things that we need to really live, but he's saying, you can have all that, but there is still something more that you have got to have to really live, and I'm going to show you the way. And listen, following Jesus into life, following Jesus into this way of life that he teaches, that's going to take trust. I mean, this is a step of faith to say, I think Jesus is going to be able to show me the way to live the good and abundant life. Now, when we were in Peru, we would have to cross the river Apurimac. And, you go up into the mountains and you come down to this valley. It's cold at the top of the mountains. There are parrots at the bottom. It's that high. You get down to the bottom of this valley and you've got to go across this bridge, which is made out of sturdy metal girders and weak, crumbling wooden slats across there. And you can see that somebody's tried to shore those up by putting some girders the other way, some slats the other way. And so you can't just hit this thing at 70 miles an hour. You've got to find the broken boards before you try to drive your van across the bridge. And the way you do that is somebody gets out of the van, walks up ahead on foot and checks them out. And then they say, all right, come on over the bridge. You're going to be safe. All right, now watch out for here. Make a little divot. Come on over the bridge. You can make it if you follow me who goes over that bridge first. Brothers and sisters, this is Jesus. This is exactly what Jesus has done for us. He died. He lived the good life. He died and he was raised from the dead. He has walked the way of life from beginning to end. He knows it like the back of his hand, and he is the one that we can trust to lead us into true and abundant life. He's the one that can walk across that bridge. He can get us to the other side. Now, why should this surprise us? Maybe it doesn't surprise you, but why should it surprise us that Jesus would be the one that knows how to live? Why should it surprise us that if we trust in him, we're going to be able to really live the good and abundant life? I mean, just look at him. Look at Jesus' life. I mean, his life is exhibit A of a life well lived. He knew how to speak to people in positions of authority. Children loved him, and he loved children, right? He knew how to act in a tough situation. He knew where to go and when to go there and how to act when he got there. He demonstrated plucky love and consistent courage and holiness and centeredness. And in our world of scatter-brained, flitting debauchery, I think that is what we sorely need. His life demonstrates somebody who knows how to live. That's how I want to live. I mean, when he was in the middle of the storm, he said, "Peace, be still." He knew how to pray. He knew how to preach. He knew how to teach. That's how I want to live. I want to be like Jesus. And I think it shouldn't surprise us that he knew and that he knows the way to live. I mean, he's the one that's walked it all the way. He's lived, he's died, he's come back to tell us about it. He's crossed the bridge and he's returned. And I realize that I'm making a statement of faith when I say that Jesus is the one to show us the abundant life, that there are other ways to think about what is the good life out there. But I still think it makes total sense. It's not a blind step of faith. It's a very realistic evaluation of who Jesus is and then placing my trust wholeheartedly in him. I mean, he's the center. He's the living one who holds all the keys, like we read in the book of Revelation. Death can't touch him. We read in Romans. He's the resurrection and the life. He gives life to whoever he wills. Where else can we go? Jesus has the only words of eternal life. And I think Jesus points us to a different way. He points us beyond our usual lives of production and desire, our lives of making and accomplishing things, our lives of buying things, because for most of us, our life's products are embarrassingly quaint. They become quaint with stunning speed. They don't have much shelf life. They make a long obituary and a whole lot of black plastic garbage bags. Is that really all there is? And I think, brothers and sisters, that we have got to follow the breadcrumbs of resurrection into this present tense reality of Jesus' life that he shows us. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. And I'm saying that of all the other possibilities that are out there, none of them are going to add up to following Jesus into the life that he has shown us, this resurrected life. I'm convinced that Jesus shows us the best, most interesting, most meaningful way to walk in the world, that there are many gods and many lords, but there is only one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and for whom we exist. It's the message of the Transfiguration. This is my Son, my beloved. Listen to him. Only Jesus will satisfy. And listen, this is going to be what we're going to look at for the next 7 weeks. It's a series on Jesus as the key to the good and abundant life. And here's the thing. Jesus says in John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. And we got to take that very seriously, because anytime you see I am, especially in the Gospel of John, you know something is going on. And anytime that's paired with seven, you know something's going on, because 7 is that number of completeness. It's all here, folks. And Jesus 7 times in the Gospel of John says, I am, and then gives a title. And he is not just saying, hey, I am, my name's Jesus, nice to meet you. He's saying, I am, and using the divine I am title. Think about all the way back to the book of Exodus, where Moses meets God in the burning bush. And Moses says, what is your name? What will I tell the people of Israel? And God says, I am. I am who I am, or I am who I will be. And so when Jesus says, I am, he is pointing us beyond just sort of a simple identity into the fullness of the identity of God the Father, who is present visibly in him. And when he says, I am the resurrection and the life, he's launching into this new kind of life that flows from his identity. And there's 7 times in the Gospel of John when he uses an I am statement. We will look at all of them. We'll end on Pentecost. But he says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. He is the one who is the great I am. And in the book of Revelation, you see this marvelously, because throughout the book of Revelation, you see God using I am phrases. And then at the very end, in Revelation 22:13, you see all of those phrases subsumed into Christ himself. And he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the first and the last. I am the beginning and the end. I am. As we walk into Jesus' identity, we get a vision of who he is. The reality of a true life, the abundant life. And we're going to be looking at these 7 statements, and we've kind of tried to envision this. And We've created this image that some people call him a cootie catcher or a fortune teller or a salt seller or whatever. But the idea is that as we look at each one of these statements, these I am statements, that each opens up into the greater depth of Jesus' life and identity. I am. And Jesus was a teacher of life. I think that when he said, I am the resurrection and the life, he's pointing to, look at me, at my identity, and you will see the true life. And that way of life was opened up when he was raised from the dead. He is a teacher of life who stood in a long tradition of teaching life. I mean, this is exactly what the ancient teachers of Israel were doing. And Jesus is pulling that all together into his own identity and into himself. He's showing us the greatest and best way to live. Jesus is a teacher of life like the ancient teachers of Israel. I mean, Proverbs, seek wisdom so that you may live. The law is so that we may know God and live. Everything about the ancient scriptures is so that we may walk before the Lord in the land of the living. It's about having this vision of who God is, worshiping him truly, knowing him truly, so that we may then live in a way that is deep and true and meaningful. Jesus draws that all together within himself, and he says, I've come that you may have life and have it abundantly. I am, and then he lists off throughout the Gospel of John these 7 statements. Jesus shows us the way to life. And the first step of living that good and abundant life is the most basic step that any of us can have. It's the one that he asked Mary when they were standing outside of Lazarus' tomb. It's really the one that the angel was calling on the women to take up, and that is the step of trust. Jesus said to Mary in John 11, do you believe me? Which really means, do you trust me? Do you think I can make this happen? Do you think I really know about life? And that's what the angel's calling them to, even though the angel doesn't use those words. The angel's like, look, he's not here. Go, tell the disciples. Go and tell them what? That it's real, that Jesus is alive, that everything he was talking about is true. Trust him. He's doing the right thing. Trust me. You want to go and talk to the disciples on this. That's our first step. Trust, belief, faith. Taking that step of trust into him, commending our lives into his hands and saying, all right, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. This is the step of discipleship. I want to live in your way because I'm convinced that this is in fact the best possible way to live the good and abundant life. Jesus is saying, do you believe this? And his trust is totally different than what we see at the beginning of the scriptures back in the Garden of Eden. Because Adam and Eve, God had created them to be able to live in the garden in communion with him, with nature, with one another. All they had to do was to continue to trust God, but they didn't. Instead, they distrusted God, did not take him at his word, and trusted the serpent. The people of Israel, they didn't have this trust. God leads them out into the desert, and they right away begin complaining. Weren't there enough tombs in Egypt? They didn't trust that God was taking them to a place that would be good, that mattered for their lives. The kings, they said, first off, the people didn't trust that God would be their king, that he was sufficient, and they wanted a king like the other nations. And then the kings, when they were installed, they didn't trust either, because who can really rely on God? I mean, you can't see him. We'd rather rely on Egypt or some ally around us. Jesus calls us to trust him, to believe in him, and live the good and abundant life. What are we trusting? What does it mean? Well, we are trusting that he knows the truest way to live, that because he was raised, he can lead us along the way, that he has gone the whole way, that we can safely follow him over that bridge. And I think perhaps nowhere else do we test our faith, test our trust, see what our trust is made of, than when we're in a place of suffering and darkness. Right? That's where we really see where our trust lies. That's where we really get down to brass tacks. But, it's in those places of challenge, of suffering, that I have experienced most profoundly the power of Jesus to show us how to live. It's where I have witnessed others walking in a peace that passes all understanding and a joy that does not come from their own hearts, their own circumstances, from everything going right. That is where I have witnessed the power of Christ breaking in, and it is a resurrecting power. It goes back to the words of Psalm 68:19. Blessed be the Lord who daily bears us up. There are going to be hard things. There is going to be tough stuff in our life. But it's when we trust in Jesus that we can not only just muddle through, shuffle through, but find our way through with some kind of hope. Not just get by, but live. That's what Jesus is showing us. And friends, brothers and sisters, Jesus is risen. Jesus lives. And because he lives, we can truly live. And I mean that now in the present tense. We can follow his example and truly live like him and for him and through him and in him. And also into eternity, we will live with him. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? It's the message of Easter. Do you trust him to show you the way into his resurrection and life? Amen.